Dr. Ursula Stark just got back from the Green Party Congress, which was held in Germany the past few days. The Green Party has shifted from being a grassroots, peace loving group to warmongers, right, Dr. Stark?
We do love peace and we do aim for peace politics, but what does that mean? Is that the same thing in the 80s than today under the circumstances of a war of aggression again in Europe?
Dr. Stark, you actually lived in Ukraine, or a guest last lecturer at Kiev Myhola Academy, and you've done a lot of your early academic work on German identity and international relations. Well, you said Greens like peace. There's a lot of changes happening right now, and it's no coincidence that these changes are tied somewhat to Donald Trump's election. There's been a huge shift in German politics with a coalition that's broke down that the Green Party was part of. What is the perspective for the Green Party, which have been huge supporters of Ukraine?
Well, first of all, sure, our tradition comes from the anti-war movement in the 80s, the anti-nuclear movement in the 80s in Europe. That was a whole different historical context. And now we're confronted with this new situation. Maybe there's one term that we should throw in and which tells it all. I guess it's Zeitenwende, or how would you translate that? It's more like a shift, and it's a
Shift,
new era.
yeah.
Exactly. So that was the thing that was first spoken out by Olaf Scholz, the chancellor of that government, that, well, we're actually in a situation in which we need to rethink our entire security policy, our entire foreign policy, and especially our relation to defense and defense politics in the sense of returning to a defense policy that's more hawkish, I would say. So that's one of the challenges of Zeitenwende. And I think the Green Party especially has been shifting towards an understanding of peace not as the absence of violence or the absence of arms or armed conflict, but the essence of peace is freedom in Europe, protection of what we call our rule-based international order, meaning notions like sovereignty, territorial integrity, and all of these things, which are under attack by the Russian aggression. So, in protecting these values, these norms in international relations, that's what a sound peace polity really is. Because if we lose this order, that's the moment when war will return to Europe, because that's the one thing that protects us from war, and that's the real basis of peace.
This thought about international order, it's something that people take so much for granted that they don't think about. And it's simplified, there's consequences for things. Russia has been isolated from the international community because they are not respecting the international order. But still German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, called Vladimir Putin a few days ago. Was that a discussion at the Green Party Congress? If there had been a different chancellor, Robert Habeck, who with what 98% support now will be the Greens candidate for chancellor, would Habeck have called Putin?
I don't think so. And I think so. I mean, that Olaf Scholz has done this is, I think, a reflection of the foreign policy of the Social Democrats right now, that still predominantly put forward the idea that we should talk to Putin and that we should like increase our diplomatic efforts. And many of them, for instance, Ralf Stegner, one of the main figures in SPD foreign policy, has traveled to Kiev, really. But he still maintains his point of view that, well, war, yeah, of course. I mean, we ship weapons to Ukraine, but they are not willing to give up the restriction of the range restriction, of the weapons and the like, So they think that escalating this war will lead to a third world war, right? And that we need to engage more in diplomacy. That's actually the reflection of their foreign policy right now. And it wasn't discussed per se at the convention, but we really tried to take a different stance here to say that our increased support for Ukraine, meaning the emphasis of our support of a NATO membership of Ukraine, of a EU membership of Ukraine, all these things. They are somehow a unique selling point in comparison to the foreign policy of the established parties such as SPD or CDU. I mean, CDU has been also vocal in their support for Ukraine, but the Greens, I would say, emphasize our military support of Ukraine is one of the preconditions of a real diplomatic solution, because Vladimir Putin will not negotiate if he doesn't see that his situation is too dire to continue, you
Right.
know.
People don't
So
negotiate unless they have to. There's a pretty wide gap between what might be needed to be done for European security and stability and what is going to get a party elected. The Green Party had major losses in regional elections. Your party leaders stepped down. New ones were now elected at the party Congress. How is this policy, which seems to be towards Ukraine, might end up hurting the Greens? Was this discussed among the party members about the risk this is taking?
our stance was that it wasn't enough. We need to scale it up. It was too much of a compromise to SPD, which, well, as I said, has a different stance in foreign policy. So, if anything, I think we decided to scale up our support and really put that forward as the essence of our foreign policy position right now.
A lot of the press coverage of the event was about the election of a candidate for chancellor and about foreign policy and security issues. Are the Greens getting away from their ecological focus from the past, or can they still do this? And I'm also bringing in changes as we all embrace artificial intelligence. Are we going to go back to nuclear in Germany? Are renewables enough?
Well, I don't think so. I think now that the coalition has collapsed, we do have the opportunity to return to some of our core issues, right? Because if you're in a coalition, you do have restrictions in that. So I don't think that we've turned away from that. I mean, the new speakers of our party are, well, for once, Felix Banajak, who is a very profile social politician. He does cover all these social issues. But Franziska Brandner, she is very credible in this whole thing of foreign policy, but also economic policy. That, well, policies are not anti-economics or something like that. It's like it's a little bit like Joe Biden when he said, like, if I hear climate, I hear jobs. Right. So that's, I think, the image that the Green Party is trying to build. And we do have expertise in that, absolutely. I think, well, the losses of the Green Party also are in great part due to a disinformation campaign also against us.
There are different theories about why the Greens did poorly in some of the regional elections, but there is a strong indication that there was disinformation campaigns directed at the Greens, particularly coming from Russia. And the Greens in particular have really stepped up in the past 12 months, from my personal observations, on social media, trying to reach younger voters. Within the party, is this discussed about how this is happening to us and we have to combat this?
Absolutely. But it's also interpreted as a sort of indication, I mean, if the Kremlin has something against you, you're probably doing something right. Of course, it's discussed. We have, for instance, from Bonn, our European member of the parliament, she's very active in this issue of disinformation and also getting all these tech giants to comply with European law, and to sort of limit the power of disinformation here. But this is a huge issue, of course, and especially, I mean, we were shocked, right, to learn the main target of disinformation in German politics, the Green Party, and the AfD, the main support moment, So, I mean, you can see the effects of disinformation in the polls and everywhere, and in election results.
There's been stories about infiltration into parties and the grassroots approach of the Green Party, the newness of their party. Do you think there's a possibility that the Kremlin had to focus with disinformation because they don't have inside influence into the Green Party like they may have in other parties?
That's an interesting thought. I haven't thought about that, honestly, but actually, I mean, I don't want to sound paranoid here, but actually, I do think that they have information from us because, I mean, and some people in our party are getting really paranoid about this because, I mean, as you know, there have been cyber attacks on the German parliament, there have been data leaks, everything. So I do think that they know pretty well because that's the reason why they're getting at us. They know their knowledge is more limited than, for instance, their knowledge of SPD, which was like, I mean, come on, Gerhard Schröder is a personal friend of Vladimir Putin. They know everything about us. They know everything about us, literally. They don't even need spies. They're there, they know the people. So I do think you're right. That's an interesting thought, actually, because we are not the friends of Vladimir Putin, of course. So that's
But you and I both were very careful with our words because didn't want to sound paranoid. However, you and I, both in our time in Ukraine, might be more familiar or more attuned to how hybrid warfare works. And I'm watching now of a wake up in Germany and an acknowledgement of something that Ukraine was aware of 10 years ago. The Poles and the Balts are aware of it. And now I think finally in Germany, there is some kind of acknowledgement that hybrid warfare is really a thing and it's happening, especially with the cutting of those undersea cables in the last 48 hours. We're recording this on Wednesday, November 20th. This is another form of hybrid warfare, attacks on communication links. Are you feeling this as an academic and also someone that's back in Germany, and awareness maybe of how misinformation and disinformation is being used more?
absolutely. And you know what? I think it goes even deeper than that. I think Zeitenwende is not just a policy change, it's a whole revolution of consciences in German identity, really. It's getting consciousness about all these things we're discussing right now about misinformation, but also our own involvement with Russia. And that hasn't even started yet. I think we're not even there yet to really acknowledge what this all encompasses and how deep this goes in our own identity and in a change of consciousness about the needs to reformulate our foreign
You're
policy.
the perfect person to talk about this because German identity is one of your topics. It has often been used as an excuse that Germany cannot make any unilateral decisions because of its history. Unilateral decisions aren't as long lasting and don't support peace as much as multilateral decisions and actions. So, it's okay that Germany doesn't want to move forward alone, but is the identity change going to change Germany's willingness and to be at the front of the line more? When it comes to economic things, Germany is always at the front of the line. But really, when it comes to security, defense, military issues, they're watching to America and NATO to take the lead. Is this going to change?
I do think it will, but I think you've just nailed the most important questions of all. Really, is this going to change? Is this going to change our way to look at leadership in Europe and to what we call the culture of restraint in Germany in military issues? I do. because the situation is a completely different one. Also, and the Trump election will play a huge part in this, that we need to step up our game in Europe. I mean, it's obvious that we need to take more responsibility for our own security. And the German role in this is absolutely pivotal. And everyone knows this. But, there was this one term that Olaf Scholz said at the beginning of his Zeitenwende discourse. If someone orders leadership with me, I'm going to deliver, and he hasn't delivered it at all. On the contrary. And I think there is an increasing notion that we need to do this because we're the main economy in Europe and it's absolutely essential, right? And leadership does not mean, I mean, the whole thing depends on whether the German politicians are able to reconcile different narratives. And that has always happened in German identity. I mean, you can reconcile the culture of restraint with the leadership, but that's a narrative twist. You have to like communicate very well.
Olaf
And you
Scholz
could
has
do it
never
like
been a good communicator, though, right?
exactly. I mean, let me give you an example of a very good green communicator, and that was Joschka Fischer.
Yeah.
And what he did back then when it came to participating in a war against Serbia without a UN mandate, he managed to do that by reconciling two different narratives in German identity. I mean, he said, of course, we have this culture of restraint and everything. And this, if you remember, we talked about the never again thing, which is very, very strong narrative in German identity. So what he did was to reconcile never again with never again genocide, And he did this twist and he said, yeah, and we need to lead in this because this is our historical responsibility. So he completely relied on German identity, but he redefined it. And that's what I think, will do also as a Green Party to redefine what really a modern peace policy is and what German identity and German responsibility in Europe really means in terms of policy.
The German system might not be something that everyone's familiar about. And with each system, there are structural things that you can use to an advantage or disadvantage. When the German coalition broke down, the three parties that had formed this majority in the German government had been trying to work together and it didn't work. And there's going to be a new election in Germany. Less than 48 hours afterwards, there was a resolution pulled out of a desk drawer about making military service compulsory again in Germany. The combination of these two things was something that raised a lot of logical questions to me. And now, like, this is political scientist to political scientist. I need you to do some hand holding here because the idea of Europe in a different security situation, the idea of Germany always being afraid of crossing the red lines that Vladimir Putin keeps talking about, to hold an election where the question of if 18-year-olds, I think everyone born after, young men born after 2006 will have to now again register so they have a database of who could possibly go into military service. Won't this election also be somewhat of a referendum on that point? And won't people not vote for the party that supported that? What was the logic between this government introducing that before an election? To whose advantage or disadvantage was that supposed to work?
Honestly, I have no idea. And I don't think that's a really good idea either. Um, I mean, as you said, the idea is just to sort of put up this kind of register of information about people, whether or not they would be willing to serve. Which is somehow, and as you said, I mean, but this idea was actually already stated before the collapse of the coalition. So I think they had this in discussion for quite a while. And it tells us a little bit about also the Social Democrats and their differences, because this is an idea from Pistorius, not from Olaf Scholz. I'm pretty sure that he wouldn't have went forward with that. But honestly, I really don't understand. And I think and we as Greens have a completely different stance on that. So this is not a green policy at all. And I think it's something born out of a very difficult situation in the Social Democrat Party.
So it's more of an internal party thing than a need for.
Because from what I know in SPD, there's very different stances on that question. So I'm not quite sure if it really will be a referendum on that. I think the whole election, and I'm not looking forward to that. But the main question of the election, in my view, will be our stance against Russia. Within foreign policy, I would say it's our stance on NATO membership of Ukraine and also EU membership and the whole future of European security. As you said, is Germany going nuclear again? There were some green members that were very vocal on this. Joschka Fischer was one of them. Also, Sergei Lagodinsky, one of our European members of parliament, made this point in German newspaper FATS that, well, we need to talk about how nuclear deterrence should be organized in Europe because, I mean, we have the situation that Russia is massively building up its nuclear capacities right in our neighborhood. So we need to reevaluate the situation. I mean, no one is really talking about a German bomb or anything, but we need to discuss these issues. And that's very sensitive. I don't think that that will be part of the campaign, but these things are looming, and we need to talk about them.
Let's talk quick about economics. US and German companies are the two largest groups that are still active in Russia. And the profits of these companies are going straight into the Kremlin's war chest. And the Kremlin is upping its defense spending, I think, to 6% next year of its GDP. And this connection between, on the one side, politically wanting to support Ukraine, but on the other side, not having the legislation in Germany that would stop German companies from basically funding the war. Do the Greens have any policies on this?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we do advocate for stronger compliance to the sanction regime, and to, yeah, sort of fill up those gaps that you just mentioned. There was also a resolution at the Congress about that. Because I mean, we need to talk about how, I mean, like in the future, how can we really finance all this? It's also one of the resolutions we had that we use Russian assets for that. These legislative things take time.
The far-right parties are on the rise in Germany. There are some parties that are saying they are not going to create coalitions with far-right parties. Some people say that's anti-democratic. Could the Greens actually be benefiting now from people's refusal to create coalitions with the AfD, for example? Are you counting on this a little bit in the federal elections that even if there could be a coalition with the AfD, people are going to choose the Greens over the AfD?
So it's very, very difficult to tell right now. I think it depends on so many factors that it's almost impossible to say. But I do hope for what we call the Habeck effect, because Robert Habeck, which is our candidate, is very popular, even among non-green voters. So I'm hoping that this effect will have some kind of effect. And also that, I mean, there have been, leaks about the involvements of AfD personnel with, for instance, like Belarusian companies and stuff like that. So I'm counting on them, on their criminal potential, and a little bit on our campaign and also our candidate, but it's very difficult to tell. I'm hoping.
A long time ago when I was at university, there was discussions about the Americanization of German politics, because there was a time when you only voted for the party And actually, the chancellor was decided within the party after the votes came in. Now that's changed. German parties have front runners, not unlike the Americans. And now you're talking about hoping that the voters vote a certain way. And I think in the United States, for some people, there was a huge wake-up call with Trump getting elected again. Do you have that much confidence that the Germans are maybe not going to continue the trend of doing what Americans do?
No, I don't have confidence, unfortunately. But because we have those trends too, right? I mean, you see that all over the world. And we're not, we used to be an exception, but we're not. And that's very concerning. But I do think that there is some reason for hope. Because I think this whole far right movement right now is also part of the crisis experience. I think if economies at some point will recover, um, then that will change a little bit too. But until then, the only thing we can do is to hold up high our democratic values and, well, fight for it.
As an educator, as a political scientist, and also as someone that has young people in your household, works with young people in the party, what would you recommend to improve democratic resilience in Germany and also internationally?
That's a good question. I mean, I could write a book on this, I guess. But you know what? I think the main thing is to live democracy or live democratic values in every situation in life and hold them high. I mean, it starts with conversation at the office to counter disinformation, encourage people to fact check, encourage people to think again. Also, like, I mean, you know that Greens, there's a huge lot of like yeah, misconceptions about Greens and also like prejudices and stuff like that. And just show your identity. I mean, and in the beginning it was like, oh, should I say that I'm a Green at the office? Oh my God, I'm not looking forward to all these discussions. But you know what? I do that. And I say, you know what? I mean, it's just wrong what you're telling me. And all these things, how we are and blah, and just to show the world how things really work and be true to yourself and hold up high democratic values in your own surrounding. That's the best thing.
No, that's a really good point. And Germany has the advantage of having a multi-party system where the tribalism in the United States is so ingrained now because, it's one or the other, and there's really no in-between options. Uh, Dr. Stark, it has, as always, been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for referencing the discussion we had about Never Again. I'll link that video here also. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.